there's kind of a thread or like three threads that run through. If you look into this with the founding fathers, they knew the people needed to be moral, they needed to be informed, and they needed to be religious.
Yeah, but the thing that doesn't get mentioned, people talk about that in the context of governing, but that doesn't mention the family, and that's where those moral religious people come from.
Yeah.
They come from a family. They don't just like
spring up out of holes in the ground.
Yeah. So the Shema is, is basically saying the family is the fundamental building block of all culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the Shema is saying, and this commandment also. So it's like telling the kids, hey, this is the only way that our society works is if you do this.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's going to be a wreck.
The first place you learn that is going to be in the family. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today, we're continuing our series on the 10 Commandments. And in this episode, we're going to talk about what we're calling the fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Now, we're kind of turning the corner from commandments that are explicitly about God to commandments that are more explicitly about how we treat other people. So this makes a lot of sense, I think, because the first ones we've studied have all been about how you relate to God, and that a proper understanding of God informs how we treat other people, how we understand ourselves, and how we treat other people. So I guess let's begin by reading this commandment from the NIV. So in Exodus 20, verse 12, it says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Now that's the version of the command in the book of Exodus. And in the book of Deuteronomy, Caleb, read Deuteronomy 5:16 for us.
Honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you.
So it's a little longer statement, a little more explicit.
It just drops in that, as the Lord your God has commanded you, because Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law.
And the may go well with you part,
Yeah.
there, yeah. And so, so as Paul said in Ephesians 6, and which we're going to look at later, this is the first commandment that comes with a promise attached to it. So
we did notice how some of the other commands had maybe an inferred promise or curse, associated with breaking it.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so apparently, this is going to come as a shock to everybody, how you treat your parents affects how God treats you. So he doesn't like it when you disrespect your parents.
Yeah.
Now, according to this commandment, it says God's not going to allow you to possess the promised land in the case of the original recipients if you mistreat your parents. Another reading would be that you're not going to live a long life regardless of where you live if you disrespect your parents.
Yeah, there would be some debate about whether that applies, that aspect of the command still applies today. Because for the Israelites themselves, they were very tied to the specific promised land, to their ancestry, right, as the children of Abraham, as the chosen people of the covenant. And so if you, if you spurn your parents, it's like, I guess you don't want to be part of that genetic line, then, do you?
Yeah,
that's what you were born into.
In some ways, and as we'll see, the parents were so bad, that the kids were trying to break away from what the parents did. We saw that in our study of the prophets, and just going through the biblical history books and stuff. That there was a lot of problems with that. All right, so Caleb, you're our historian, as I always like to say. So can you give us some biblical context for this command, like the history of parent-child relationships in the Bible? This is a great tour. Well, if you want to get depressed.
The next story in the Bible after the Garden of Eden is also a pretty famous one with Cain and Abel, right? So in Genesis 4, verses 1 through 12, this is what we read. Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man." Later she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, and Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Now Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let's go out to the field." While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" "I don't know," he replied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now you are under a curse and driven from the ground, which opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield its crops for you. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth."
So the family hasn't even been invented for very long,
Yeah.
and suddenly things go
They're
south.
literally the first family, and they...
Yeah. It's kind of like you don't have to teach your kid to tell you no, when they're little. They just figure it out, and they just like, no,
Yeah.
and so same thing here.
I have a will.
Yeah. The first two kids, they went south fast, or at least one of them. And
I think they let Cain watch too much television, probably.
that may have been what it was, yeah. Where was it coming from? Anyway, but so notice, though, obviously, if you're killing your brother, you're not honoring your parents.
Yeah.
It's their son.
It's like that story. It's like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son, right? When he and his dad are arguing, and the dad's like, "This is this brother of yours," and he's like, "Oh, this son of yours," and it's like denying anything to do with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the dad's like, "Last time I checked, I made both of you." So.
Well, notice that the curse that he receives is directly related to the land, which is similar to the commandment, that we've been we're looking at this week. To the land, to the ground. He says that the soil's not going to produce for you, and of course he's driven from the ground. He's driven out away from his family.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and so that's connected, of course, with like in the commandment that you'll live long in the land. And we've seen this as well in our Old Testament study. This came up a couple of times throughout, like in some of the prophets and things.
So that's the first family. There's lots of disobedience there with the murder with the fratricide, there. So now, how about Noah's family? Can you?
Oh yeah, it's. I guess nobody's killed, so it's an improvement. Possibly.
Maybe.
So in Genesis 9:18 through 29, this is right after the flood, This is, keep in mind, this is like the best family in the world because they're the only family in the world. Well, they were the family that God chose to save. It says Noah was honest before he was righteous in God's sight, whereas every other man was doing what was good in his own eyes. So Genesis 9:18 through 29. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the three sons of Noah, and from them came the people who were scattered over the whole earth. Noah, a man of the soil, proceeded to plant a vineyard. When he drank some of its wine, and maybe that's problematic too. First thing Noah does when he's out of the ark, all right, we got to get some wine going here. When he drank some of its wine, he became drunk and lay uncovered inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it across their shoulders. Then they walked in backward and covered their father's naked body. Their faces were turned the other way so that they would not see their father naked. When Noah awoke from his wine and found out what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers." He also said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. May Canaan be the slave of Shem. May God extend Japheth's territory. May Japheth live in the tents of Shem. And may Canaan be the slave of Japheth." So that's interesting because he's directing it at Canaan and not even at him. After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. Noah lived a total of 950 years, and then he died.
So we had a chance to start all over. And it went about the same.
Yeah.
It's a,
Yeah. So notice it says Noah is a man of the soil, right? He's working the land.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
tying it
it's
back
more
to the
of
land.
this, emphasis on the land.
Mm-hmm.
And Shem carries the blessing of God. So he says, praise be to the Lord, the God of Shem. That's interesting.
And that's, of course, where we get the name Semitic people. All the descendants of Shem are the Semitic peoples, such as the Jews, among others. But, all right, so it does say also that Japheth's territory will be expanded. So,
yes.
So that's interesting. So there's another, the blessing of the one who does right is you get a great land.
Mm-hmm.
But the one who is getting cursed is going to end up being a slave in those lands.
Right.
Not owning the lands. So what happened here? So why is this going on? Like, okay,
isn't it Noah's fault?
Yeah,
he's the one who got drunk.
Yeah, Noah got drunk, and then it's like, oh, I just saw him naked. But so you have to be a better student of the Bible to try to figure this out, right? So there's a few.
By the way, this is going to be PG-13.
Yeah. There are a few other places that talk about a wife's nakedness as the husband's nakedness. So this might mean that Ham saw his mother naked, or possibly worse. So let's
maybe read it as this is, or all those stories are using this as like a placeholder. So all the things that come up later that talk about this are using this story as like a polite way to discuss what happens.
Yeah. Well, so look, I'm going to read these from the American Standard Version because it uses a more literal translation than the modern versions do, such as the NIV. So here in the ASV, in Leviticus 18:6-8, it says, "None of you shall approach to any that are near of kin to him to uncover their nakedness. I am Jehovah. The nakedness of thy father, even the nakedness of thy mother, shalt thou not uncover. She is thy mother. Thou shalt not uncover her nakedness. The nakedness of thy father's wife shalt thou not uncover. It is thy father's nakedness." Now that, if you read that literally, is saying the mom's nakedness is the father's nakedness. So then when you go back and see that Ham saw his father's nakedness, it's like, well, that probably means he saw his mom as well, because that's considered, one flesh, one thing right there, the father's nakedness.
Yeah, so that's likely what's happening. It's kind of like the idea of like like a cuckold. Like you would think it's actually more shameful for the man in a way than for the woman. It's a similar concept of the two are, because they're married, the shame of the one is kind of the shame of the other.
Yeah. Well, it gets worse.
Yeah.
So we proceed down through Leviticus 18 down to verse 19, and it says, "And thou shalt not approach unto a woman to uncover her nakedness as long as she is impure by her uncleanness." So that is clearly saying that uncovering nakedness means to have intercourse.
Yeah.
So there's
it's talking about the uncleanliness there. It's talking about a menstruation.
Yeah.
And there's in the Levitical law after the menstruation, because blood makes you unclean, right? There's still a period where a woman's unclean.
So putting two and two together here, the implication is that it's likely that Ham may have actually taken advantage of his own mother while both she and Noah were drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an obvious dishonoring of your parents.
Yeah.
There. Now, this is before the law, so it's not something new that God made up at the Ten Commandments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was fun.
Yeah.
Let's move on to...
That results in the curse, though. Yeah. That's why Ham had such a severe curse upon him.
Let's move on to Proverbs and see if we can find a less jarring passage.
Yeah. Well, I think that this commandment is best probably captured by Proverbs 30, verse 17, which says, "The eye that mocks a father, that scorns an aged mother, will be pecked out by the ravens of the valley, will be eaten by the vultures." Now, we've always said so far through our series that there's negative statements and positive statements of the promises.
Yeah, we might find a positive one later.
So here, this is the negative statement. So what is it saying? I mean, the eye that mocks a father, that makes sense. You have no respect for what your dad tells you. And then the one that scorns an aged mother. See, the fact that it puts aged in there means there's a whole history there. Like everything your mom's done for you, like if you think about from not just carrying you before you're born and then giving birth to you and going through that labor and then, raising you, weaning you, caring for you, wiping your tail, all the things that a mom has to do for you. And then she gets old and you treat her bad.
Yeah.
It's like, that is not cool. That's basically what this is saying. And so, of course, Proverbs aren't meant to be taken literally sometimes. And this would be one of those Proverbs. It's not like that every person who does anything bad to their parents ends up dead in a field with a bird plucking their eye out. But what it is saying, though, is if you run across a guy out in the field laying there dead whose eyes have been plucked out by the birds, he's probably the kind of guy that has no concern for his parents, and that's why he was left
probably,
out there. He's not a family guy. Yeah. He's not a family guy.
Whatever he's doing is probably not what his mom wanted him to do.
Probably not.
He could have just been a victim of unfortunate circumstance, but yeah. I mean, talking about like the aged mother there, right? Like you were saying, remember all the things your mom took care of you when you were helpless as a baby, and as she becomes helpless in her old age, you kind of have to return the favor. And if you don't do that, I mean, like what kind of example are you setting for your own kids? If you even have kids, maybe you just scorn the whole idea of family entirely, or if you even know your kids, or like what's going to happen to you when you get older, right? Why don't you keep that tradition going, keep that respect for the family and for older people, for the generations supporting each other? If you decide, now we're breaking that because I don't want to do my end of it when it's hard, it's like, well, who's going to take care of you when you're old? You're just going to wind up, lying in a ditch somewhere. And I guess the carrion fowl will take care of you because that's all you've got left at that point.
Yeah.
And it's, again, maybe an extreme example, but it would be kind of the same thing. You're going to be very likely lonely or dependent on somebody who's not family, who doesn't have any obligation to you,
Yeah, I mean, a modern proverb might be, the person that deserts their parents to a nursing home and never visits them until they die will suffer the same fate themselves, or something like that, That would be, because, dying out in a field with a bird plucking your eyes out sounds like something that happened a long time ago. It doesn't happen anymore. But, I mean, in a war-torn area or something like that, it's, very likely. But, I think why do we understand that this proverb is true? It's because for that to happen to you, for you to be left alone with no proper burial and, being eaten by animals out in the field would mean that there's nobody that cares about you. You aren't a family oriented person, and so you've trained yourself your whole life to ignore authority, to hide the truth, to avoid responsibility, to betray trusts. And, once you've trained yourself to be that kind of person, you're going to be the kind of person that like an Ebenezer Scrooge who dies unmourned,
Yeah.
So
when he sees his own future there.
Yeah.
At an unattended gravestone. It's only marginally better than being plucked by ravens and vultures.
That's true. Yeah. So since you've avoided societal norms your whole life, your life ends abnormally. And that's what this is clearly saying. This is an abnormal way to die.
Yeah, this is something I think in our culture, we just do not want to think about death at all. We don't want to think about our own death or what's going to happen at the end. But I mean, in a way, kind of the whole point of life is to die like the right death, like to be surrounded by family and friends and stuff, to have still kind of have your dignity, not to have just sold your soul to the devil, done everything you could to like hang on to every second of life, every scrap of wealth or something like that, but to have kind of accepted it gracefully and gotten there surrounded by those who love you. And if you keep that kind of stuff in mind, then these are the sort of traditions and morals that you're going to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Okay. So that's basically what this commandment is saying. right? Honoring your parents is normal and good. And if you do that, your life will turn out well.
And your death.
Yeah, your life and your death, which death is part of life, right? So, but this commandment to honor your parents here that we're studying this week isn't the first time that the Ten Commandments have mentioned parenting.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people, like when I say that to them, I've been experimenting this week. People
Including
are like,
me. Yeah.
yeah,
I forgot it already.
People are like, wait, what? When did it mention parenting before that? They were all about God and idols and stuff. But so if you go back and read Exodus 20, verses 4 through 6 again, it says, "You shall not make for yourselves an image in the form of anything in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments." So,
Yeah. I mean, think about Noah's reaction there when he wakes up and finds what happened. He curses Canaan and not even Ham. Like it immediately carries into a generational effect.
oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, parents have been warned to properly teach their children, right? So failure to do so is going to have a multi-generational effect.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that brings up an interesting thing, because I sometimes you hear people talk about this, like, well, what about the people who are in an isolated pocket in Africa and don't know about Jesus? What happens to them when they die, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I hear people over the years, since I was in college and high school, I remember people talk about this question, like, what about the people who don't have any outside contact, they've never heard about Jesus, then they die, what happens to them? Well, if you think about it, there have been 2 times in biblical history where everybody in the world knew who God was.
We just read them.
Yeah, we just did that. Those are the 2.
Adam and Eve and Noah and his family.
Yeah, so everybody in the world, knew who God was and what he wanted and had a relationship with him. Now, the fact that there are pockets of people who have no idea about the biblical story, the biblical God, or the New Testament even, means that we have done a terrible job, right?
Yeah.
Of educating, of practicing the Shema, which Caleb and I have talked about so many times.
Yeah, somewhere up the line, somebody just let it completely go to waste and be forgotten entirely.
So,
because they started killing their brothers and, sleeping with their mothers.
Yeah. So, and I know, and like, so this earlier commandment about idol worship, right, talked about parents. And the reason was because the parents were teaching the kids to worship idols.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, the men were marrying foreign women who were idol worshipers and bringing that into their family, and their kids were being raised by them. But I mean, not to say that the men weren't a bad influence too. Now, like, so the Shema, let's go back and review again. Caleb, why don't you read Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9.
"Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates."
It never gets old. I mean, I don't know how many times we talk about it, or we haven't read it as many times as we've talked about it, but it's that negative versus positive again, though.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the negative that we looked at in the idol thing, where it's like you're going to be carried out multiple generations. Then you got the positive: when you do the right thing, it carries on for thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Shema has a much greater capacity to save than our mistakes have to condemn.
Mm-hmm. If the Shema or the 5th commandment are not followed, right? Like the Shema here has a command on the parents: teach your children this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If that's not followed, or if the commandment to honor your parents, that's a command on the children. If either or both of those things are not followed, then people end up, dead in a field with birds eating their eyeballs.
Yeah, figuratively speaking.
Maybe a couple of them literally, probably.
Yeah, so we have these positives and negatives, right? The positive side would be a good father and a good son, and you will enjoy a normal and happy life.
Yeah, the negative would be a bad father, and your family will suffer regrettable generational damage, all thanks to
Hmm.
you.
Yeah. Yeah, and be a bad son, and you will suffer a regrettable lonely death.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not you, Caleb, but
I mean, you have 3 sons, and I'm the only one here. So,
that's true. Yep, and Caleb's in the clear.
yeah.
Uh, all right. So yeah, but you see the picture we're trying to paint here. There's good and bad, curses and blessings for parents and children.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of responsibility to go around.
Yeah. So, I think this establishes a broader principle, right? Because the Shema gives this positive command on the parents that you have a responsibility to teach your children. Like, you're in charge of them, and you have to do what's in your power to, help them turn out right, basically.
Yeah, because the family is like the fundamental principle of all government.
Yeah.
It's the building block which all other governing
Yeah. So
takes.
he's telling you, teach them these commands, establish these traditions with them while they're young, while you have the authority over them. And then to the children, let your parents do that. It's their job.
Mhm.
You don't know what you're doing yet, so let them teach you and lead you.
Yeah, Caleb.
Yeah,
Let me
honor-
get the rest of this. I'll take the podcast from you. No,
Yeah.
all right.
So I think that establishes a broader principle that where one person has a responsibility to lead others, those subordinates owe their obedience to them. So if I want to look at 1 Peter 2, verse 13 through 18 here, where it says, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh." So, keeping with our theme today, this is another really difficult, uncomfortable passage, right?
Mhm.
We've had murdering of your own brother, we've had abuse of your own mother, we've had eyeballs plucked out, and now we've got slaves and emperors. If you're a good American, hearing this talk about slaves submitting to their masters and everybody honoring the emperor as the supreme authority should just, sound so wrong to you. But this is Peter.
Mhm.
In the same breath, he look at there we don't have the verses label on here. It's probably verse 17, where he says, side by side in the same pen stroke, fear God, honor the emperor. And then in the next sentence, right after that, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit to your masters. I mean, it's just right there. Why would Peter say that? Doesn't he remember what happened in the Revolution and in the Civil War?
No, he probably doesn't, but as prescient as he was.
Yeah. I think, again, it goes back to this principle. It's saying, look, the emperor, God's put the emperor in charge. You may not always like what he does. Maybe he doesn't even always do the right thing. But first of all, that's a pretty hard job.
Mhm.
I don't think it's easy to assume that you actually know better or would do any better. He's got that job of keeping the peace, keeping the order in the empire. And obviously it's in his interest to do that, because if the whole thing goes into disorder and it collapses and he's an emperor of nothing,
Yeah.
probably gets a knife in his back or 50,
Yeah, I don't think we can possibly understand like the number of pressures and multiple balls that an emperor is juggling and how he makes
Yeah.
decisions. It's like when you hear a jury comes back and with a conviction you don't like, you say, "Oh, I saw pictures of the murder scene. It was horrible. That guy should have gone down the river." It's like,
Yeah.
well, they heard the whole story, not the
Yeah.
picture that you saw. So
Yeah, somebody's got to make the decision, and any one of us or group of us who were given the decision to make are still fallible, but somebody's got to have that authority. So I mean, think of like Romans 13. That's a really famous passage, right, where Paul talks about submitting to authorities because God has appointed them. It's the same principle, right? You're not the emperor, you're the subject. His job is to make these decisions. Your job is to submit to them. Obviously, there's times as Christians where there are things we might not be able to obey. We have to follow God over following man. But as a general principle, I think it's the same thing. And even in a more uncomfortable setting like slaves and masters, or at least for us, like employees and employers, that's the relationship. That's the order that's established. And I want to draw our attention to where Peter says, in the first sentence there, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, right? We're doing this for God, not just for man. And then down later, for it is God's will that by doing good, you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. We're supposed to be setting a good example. Like not everybody, especially if you're higher up, if you just walk up to them and be like, hey, did you know that your entire life philosophy is actually wrong and you should be a Christian? Like, all right, well, get back to work, you idiot.
Like Pharaoh.
But if you're just setting a good example, and they're just seeing, like, how come every time I'm around them, like, it seems like they're joyful and they're at peace. Yeah. They're living as free, like Peter says, even though they're like making themselves a slave to kind of their moral code. Mm-hmm. Why did I feel that emanating from them, or why did their family always seems to be just really functional, and they'll see the good effects, or at least they'll be able to. Some people will not want to see, but that's what Peter's calling us to here. This is God's will, is that with our good example, we'll be able to demonstrate his will to others.
Yeah, that's the concept that most people are attracted to a Christian before they're attracted to Christ.
Yeah.
Because they've never investigated Christ. Very few people walk into a bookstore and find an old dusty Bible and brush it off and go, what's this? And read it cover to cover and go, I'm going to be a Christian now.
Yeah.
They run into the guy that works in the bookstore that is a Christian, and they have a conversation with him and think he's a great guy and want to be more like him.
Yeah, but this applies to probably most Christians too. Like, we're not just walking around with an open mind, like, any idea I see today, I'm going to, swallow that and try and live it out. Like, everyone's kind of on their guard. They have a little turtle shell, around their philosophy. And if you, especially, or at least they will retreat into that shell if somebody comes up and it's like, so do you want to convert to my religion? It's like, whoa, hang on. Let me throw up my fences. But if they see somebody living a good life with joy, with peace, and all of that, then they start to open up and be curious. They might want to hop over the fence and see what's going on. So,
well, and that's getting back to the Shema. I mean, like, when you put the Shema in practice in your family, and you're teaching your kids the right things, and that keeps you focused on right things, and everybody in the family's focused on right things, and you are a model family because of that.
That's why this is, because the family is the foundational unit of the society. And that's why the command doesn't just say submit to the king, honor the emperor or whatever. He would have just left him in Egypt.
Well, and any governing principles that you run across, whether they're in the Bible or the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or whatever, they all assume that there's healthy functioning families in the community.
Yeah, because Pharaoh was killing the babies. Remember, so at that point, like, they need to you have to get out. They can't. How are you going to honor your parents if you're dead? How do you teach your children the way of God if they're dead? So, like, that's one of those things where you can't obey it.
Well, everybody likes to quote that John Adams quotation, which I didn't look at ahead of time, but it's that thing about our country is designed for a moral and
most of the founding fathers had a similar quote that you can pull for that. James Madison said, "If men were angels, they would need no government."
Yeah. But Adams was like, this country was designed for religious and moral people and is wholly inadequate for any other. Yeah. Or something like that. I'll
we
find
have
it
to
and put it
be,
up.
There's kind of a thread, or like three threads that run through, if you look into this with the founding fathers. They knew the people needed to be moral, they needed to be informed, and they needed to be religious.
Yeah, but the thing that doesn't get mentioned, people talk about that in the context of governing, but that doesn't mention the family, and that's where those moral religious people come from. Yeah. They come from a family. They don't just
spring up out of holes in the ground.
Yeah. So the Shema is, is basically saying the family is the fundamental building block of all culture.
Mm-hmm.
That's all the Shema is saying, and this commandment also. So it's like telling the kids, hey, this is the only way that our society works is if you do this.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's going to be a wreck.
The first place you learn that is going to be in the family. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So why don't we have a positive verse? Proverbs.
There's no eyeballs in this one.
No.
There's no murder or rape or slavery.
They're coming up.
Okay.
They're coming up. Just a slight reprieve. So Proverbs 22:6 says, "Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it." So, just like Proverbs 30:17, our other favorite proverb, you can't take them totally literally true, right? This doesn't mean that every kid that you try to raise the right way is going to stick with it his whole life, but it's a general truism.
But again, if you find somebody who is old who has stuck with that, he probably didn't figure it out just last week.
Yeah. Right. And that's just like if you run across the guy in the field with the bird plucking his eye out, you go, "Oh, that guy probably isn't a family guy."
Most likely, went down
the person that you see dying on their deathbed surrounded by an entire family, you go, "I bet that guy practiced the Shema." And so this is it. Like you raised your kids the right way and they're still around you at the end of your life. It's a beautiful thing. The child has an obligation, right, to follow this commandment and honor the parents' teaching. It's not just an obligation, but it's actually a blessing. But it is an obligation. And so to get back to some negative passages, passages like this is recognized in the law. So passages like Deuteronomy 24:16 say, "Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children put to death for their parents. Each will die for their own sin." So that's a relief. But that guy that died out in the field, right? He was dying for something he did wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But
this calls to mind like that passage about the blind man in the Gospels, right?
Yeah.
Who sinned that this man was born blind, him or his parents? Yeah.
Neither, right? But in that case, so one of the hallmarks of the law in the Bible, as compared to all other law codes we found from the ancient Near East, is that there was no vicarious punishment,
of humans.
Which is what
there was of animals.
Well, sure, as atonement, you mean? Yeah.
Or the scapegoat he's literally a vicarious goat that wanders off into the middle of nowhere.
So but the hallmark there is that Caleb can't be killed for something foolish that I do, and I can't be killed for something foolish that he does. Right? We both have an obligation to do the right thing, but outside of the law and the illegalities of things, he also has an obligation to honor me and my wife as his parents. And so the one who disobeys is the one who should be punished.
Right. Because it could go wrong in at least two ways, right? The parents could not teach the children right, and we're not going to punish the children because they wouldn't have known any better at the time. And the children could just decide not to obey, So we're not going to punish the parents for the fact that their child has a free will.
Yeah. When we look at these and break them down, like we can understand why an adult who misleads a child should be punished, right? You don't teach them the Shema. So in Matthew 18, beginning in verse 6.
"If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea." Another one of those comforting passages. "Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Such things must come, but woe to the person through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell." So don't let anybody tell you that Jesus never taught about hell, by the way.
That's true.
It's right there.
And he's also calling up Proverbs 30:17 again, because we got another eyeball being plucked out here.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting.
That should be the title of this episode.
So, I think we all understand that if you mislead a child, you should be punished, and you will be punished, right? But everybody hates the rest of this passage, right? I included it for this reason because it talks about, getting your limbs cut off, your eyes gouged out. And, what I've come to learn over the years is whatever part of a passage of Jesus' teachings that bothers you that's the main point of the lesson. So if he says something that bothers you, you better start pondering it a little deeper because that's the message that he has for you. And in this case, I think every time I have a conversation with people about this, they're always like, that wasn't literal, right? He didn't mean I should actually cut my hand, my foot, and my eyeball, off poke my eyeball out if it causes me to sin, right? He was just speaking figuratively, wasn't he? And the fact that bothers you a lot means you probably need to sit and cogitate on this because I think...
Because we're all realizing we'd be, a bunch of blind paraplegics.
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to think of what the foot sins are. But anyway, I got the hand and eye ones down. But, okay, now, I think if somebody went to Jesus and asked him, because people ask me the question, as a Bible class teacher or just as a Christian friend or something. Now, like, if you went to Jesus and asked him, hey, you're not really that's pretty extreme. Like, cut off my hand, cut off my foot, poke out my eye. You didn't really mean that, right? I think Jesus would say, no, you're right. That's pretty extreme. You know what? Why don't we just not do any of those sins and then we won't have to worry about it?
Yeah.
It's like, that's his point. His point is...
That's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't you hate the sin?
People downplay their sin, at least their own sins,
Yeah.
I think that's why this comes right on the back of that. It's saying you realize when somebody else does it. Like if somebody, abuses a child or something terrible, we're all like, bring out the millstone. That guy sucks. We want to see that. We talked about this before. Which lesson was that? One of the prophets, I think Obadiah maybe, when we were talking about watching somebody come up or come down, maybe. I can't remember now. But it was like I brought up some movie examples where there's movies where we love to see like a bad guy fall, or we love to see a good guy rise, and then when it applies to our lives with God, it's like but I don't want to pull him down a little and push me up a little, so I look a little better by comparison, and I think that's kind of right on the heel of that. Jesus is saying you recognize this if somebody causes a little one to stumble, what they deserve. But you don't apply it to yourself.
Yeah.
When you stumble or when you sin, you think your punishment should be less harsh?
Yeah. So what he's saying is if you don't want to take the medicine, then make sure you back up, right? And just don't do the crime. Like it's the beginning of the TV show Beretta back in the 70s. The song said, don't do the crime if you can't do the time. And it's a common saying. But anyway, it makes me think of golf because... My favorite golf instructor in Knoxville, Tennessee here is a guy named Byron Williams. If you need a lesson, give Byron a call. He's not paying for this, by the way. But
yet.
So one time I was taking a short game lesson from Byron. So we were working around the green and I was chipping and stuff. And I said, hey, I got a question for you. The other day this happened to me on the golf course. And there was a little raised up brow next to the green and the pin was... The hole was right near it, only like 5-6 feet away from this raised up area in the grass. And I put a ball up there and I said, I had a ball just like this. It was up here high and off the green and I had to get it down. The pin was right there and it was a drop and it was all
just
downhill.
Roll away. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, what are you supposed to do in those situations? And he looked at me and he said, okay, what you do in those situations is you back up one shot and you don't hit it there. Because it's impossible. And so, that's a course management idea. It's like, think about what's coming, make sure you put the ball in the right place, leave it if you're going to miss on the right side of the pin, right? So I'm not good enough to do that, but but I think that's what Jesus was saying is, you know what? If you don't want to think about the consequences of these things, why don't you just back up a step and then just don't do them?
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty common sense, really. It's really cool when you think about it that way. So let's get back to this commandment to honor parents. It's for the children, right? Right, Kenny?
Yeah, it's a command to children. So why should a child who dishonors a parent be punished? Like we kind of mentioned earlier, they don't know better. Like if the parents don't lead them well, and they're disobeying. Well, we don't. We apply that on the parents. We look at the parents and say, "Yeah, you're a bad parent." We don't blame the kids because they don't know better.
But you got solid gold, great parents, and they do everything for you, and they teach you all the right and wrong, and they teach you responsibility and everything, and you still turn out bad, right?
Yeah.
So let's look at Matthew. We'll jump.
I said I'm sorry. I don't know.
Let's jump back, because right before the passage we just read in Matthew 18, 1-5, it says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, 'Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me.'" Now, what is it you learn about children in this statement of Jesus Christ that commends them so highly as being the ideal citizen in the kingdom of heaven?
It's the trust, I think, the dependence that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah. I talked about this. I think it was the introduction episode for the Ten Commandment series. Is that right? When I was talking about people in my generation in our society, we tend to have this approach to life that it all begins with me, and there's this idea that like the individual is this sort of autonomous entity that kind of goes around interacting with other autonomous entities or with government entities and making little, you give up some rights, like a social contract, you give up some rights to receive some, benefits. And it's just not true. Like you begin not autonomous, not independent. You're entirely dependent. You're dependent on the relationship between other people to even be conceived. So
yeah, I think the analogy you gave was a book that like you think it starts at chapter 40 where you're born. Yeah. But there was a whole bunch of stuff ahead of that sets up
read any biography of any person, and it's going to start with talking about their parents, like the town they grew up in, like the baker who was like a mentor to some people who had an influence on them, teachers and parents and stuff. And then it starts getting into their life once they kind of grow up and really start taking agency. And we tend to just think, just cut all that stuff off. I'm 18, and now I'm writing the book of my life, and it's going to be how I want it to be.
Yeah, I mean, you started out not caring for yourself at all. You were fed by your mom, you were diapered by your parents. You were totally dependent on all these things. And until we learn to trust God the same way that a little child trusts a mother or a father when they're first born, we're not going to enter his kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it also implies, right, this little lesson of Jesus is here, that when a child's young, they understand all this completely. Just like we talked about, there were 2 times in history where everybody knew who God was.
Yeah.
There's a time in your life when you understood what it meant to be dependent on your parents, and you respected them for it, and they took care of you. In most cases, obviously, there are situations where that's not true.
In general, a family that's somewhat resembling this kind of
intact.
This, what we've been examining, the Shema, honoring a normally ordered society.
Yeah. So if you understood that your parents did everything for you, then if that's true, then why shouldn't we be honoring our parents now? Say once we're adults or whatever, for all the love that they gave us, everything that they sacrificed for us all those years to raise us.
Yeah. So. And it's the same way that we're dependent on God, right? I mean, we have to have the same approach with our salvation too. Like and this is, maybe we'll get in some hot water here, but especially I think in like American evangelicalism, they'll ask you, well, when were you saved? And it's like, oh, well, they usually mean, when did you decide to accept Jesus? Like, I don't think it was up to me. Like, God wasn't like, I'd like to help. I just can't. I can't. My hands are tied until Caleb gives me the green light. Like I can't help him. And I mean, this same passage, it's a very strong passage that's used as an argument for like infant baptism, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it even challenges the way that we might want to think of salvation. Where do we start that book? Is it, well, once I decide, now it actually matters. Now the story starts. It doesn't begin before that with the parents who raised you, like the church you grew up at, the parents who raised them, who raised them, who raised them, the like crazy monk who wandered into like a pagan town and started preaching to people 1200 years ago or whatever, and all the way back to the work Christ did in his ministry. We're part of this contiguous story. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm now going to decide that I want this, rather than recognizing that it's something you've actually received.
Yeah. I mean, a baby dedication even, there are churches that don't do infant baptism, but they still have baby dedications. And I think that's a great thing, to put the child up in front of the entire congregation and everybody pledge to raise that child as a Christian.
Yeah. And that's, having a community that does that as well, like within the church congregation is, you have a commitment from more than just the parents, right? There's a whole group of friends and church family that's going to uphold that.
Yes. So that's a beautiful picture. So while we're talking about beautiful things, let's talk about parents having an obligation to make obedience attractive to their kids, right? So Ephesians 6, verses 1-4 says,
"Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord." I think actually, so I mean, I could be wrong, but maybe what most people would focus on in the promise there that's associated with the command is the long life. I would focus on the enjoy, right? Because we talked about, well, there's exceptions, but the guy who you see dead in a ditch versus the guy who's, dying in the bed surrounded by loved ones, maybe he's dying early of like cancer at 40 or something, but is, still the way that he's died,
a fulfilling
is he content?
life.
Is there joy? Is there peace? Yeah, I would focus on that part. Enjoy the life that you have on the earth, because you could live. Of course, we have sayings, right? Like only the good die young. Like and there are psalms as well that talk about the good perish, the wicked linger, and like I think both of these things can apply. But what's happening is, are you enjoying that long life, or are you miserable the whole time?
Yeah. I mean, in a way, you could say, who wants a long life if it's terrible, right? I mean,
yeah, that's true.
But of course, you would want your life. You would want to linger if you're having a great life, so you can see your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids, and all those things are fantastic. But sure, the quality of life is definitely much more important than, say, the length of it.
And this is not, we're not talking about quality of material possessions either. That's in our culture, people talk about quality of life a lot. And they're usually saying, like, what kind of insurance plan do you have or something like that.
Well, so speaking of quality of life, right, that's what the end of this passage is saying in verse 4 is, fathers, hey, look, don't make it painful for your kid to be obedient. Like, try to make it enjoyable. Try to make it, easy for them to honor you. And if parents and children both are doing their jobs right, then the promise of this commandment can be realized. Because both the father's making it easy for them, and it makes it easy for them to be obedient and honorable toward both of their parents. So that's the Shema, both sides of the coin, right? Of the Shema,
right?
So, all right. So we oftentimes try to go to Revelation but I found a passage in 2 Timothy that sounds just as end of timey as Revelation. So we're going to go with that this week. 2 Timothy 3:1-5 says, "But mark this, there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people." All right, so apparently disobeying your parents is a sign of the end of the age. So
It's another one of those lists like we've looked at. It seems to try to hit as many commandments as it can.
yeah. So newsflash, the end of time is here.
Lovers of themselves is such a fascinating line. I mean, go to any bookstore if you can still find one. Barnes and Noble still exists. And just, go look at like self-help books, self-love books, self-care, all like, you're enough, I'm enough. I'm worth it. And like all this stuff, just like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's making that same mistake, starting with me. Chapter 1 is me.
Yeah. It's that self-worship. But then you also have the sister sin of child worship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which also seems endemic in the culture. You know, it's just like,
that's true.
Oh yeah, whatever you want, sweetie. Whatever you want, center of the universe. I don't see how a kid can turn out good when they're turned into the center of the universe instead of part of a healthy family.
Yeah, it's like these are the parents that have the kids on a leash, but the kid's really the one in control.
Yeah, they've got the shock button.
Yeah,
the parents.
Yeah, they just threaten to cry in public and they get whatever they want.
Well, interestingly, right, we saw that parenting was mentioned in the section on idol worship earlier in the Ten Commandments.
Oh yeah, and did we even mention right here that specific line of disobedient to their parents? Right here in verse 2.
Oh yeah,
I called our attention to that.
I read it.
Then I immediately called our attention away. So that's in the middle there.
Yeah, I said it was a sign of the end of the times.
But if you have parents who try to teach you, to bring you up in the ways of God, they're going to be teaching you the opposite of all these things, right?
Yes.
To be a lover of money, boastful, proud, abusive, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control. It's such a long list.
Yeah.
I also like that last verse there, I don't like it, but I find it interesting and applicable to our culture. Having a form of godliness, but denying its power. That's really interesting. Like, we kind of look at, I think about people like Jordan Peterson or Ion Hirsi who I think we're definitely drawn to these days as Christians. Like they bring a lot of attention to the Bible, to Christianity, talking about it in a positive light, but it's like a very social Christianity. It's like, well, this is a good moral code that would improve our society and make things better, so we should do it. And it's like, why do you think that is? Because like if you've ever watched Peterson be asked on any interview he's ever been on, be asked, do you believe in God? It's incredible. You wouldn't think, a guy of his age would be so acrobatic, but he just starts backflipping away from the question, like any way he can twist out of it. And it's like having this form of godliness because we want to recognize the good without bringing any of the responsibility. We don't want that. We don't want to submit to that authority, right? We want to take all the good stuff. Or Richard Dawkins, I think I've mentioned him on here, where he said, I want to live in a Christian society, but he doesn't want to be a Christian. It's like, what on earth does that mean?
Well, that's funny that you mentioned both of those things because I watched Peterson's Gospels seminar.
Yeah.
And it had some interesting moments in it.
Yeah, I don't want to sound ungrateful.
No. Yeah. I was going to say, in along with what you're saying, and I think in the last one or next to last one, somebody was talking about, well, I'm an atheist because he has like people who aren't Christians, and I'm a non-believer, whatever he said. And I just wonder, like, can I still go to heaven? And they were all talking about it in this round table, like, let's talk about it. Probably. And I was sitting there thinking, okay, everything that we teach in Biblocus about what heaven is, heaven comes with God.
Yeah.
It is like union with God, together with God. He's the light. There's no more sun. There's no temple because he's there all the time with you. It's like total in the presence of God forever. And for a person who loves God, that's like awesome.
Yeah.
I get to be with Christ all the time. And then for the person who doesn't care about him, why does he want that? Like, why would you be, but can I go to heaven too? Because I want to be with that Jesus guy I don't really care about, but it's like, well,
it's like, I want all those good things if we can just leave him out of it. I mean, think about this is the first commandment that comes with a promise, right? To honor your parents. It's like, well, I'd like the benefits. I know I've quoted this before from The Office. Well, I will be honest, I do want all of the credit and none of the blame. It's like, I'd like to have the benefits. I'd like to enjoy a long life, and have an ordered life, be a part of a normal society. I don't want to have to give anything to get that. I don't want to have to take care of my parents when they're, incontinent. Like,
Yeah. Thanks, Caleb.
I'd like to get the benefits without any of the baggage, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, I think this commandment is all about gratitude, right? Like we just talked about in that Matthew passage. But it's also about outcomes. It talks about the outcomes too. And we looked at a lot of passages about outcomes, good and bad, mostly bad. So we'll start out with our 10 words takeaway negative edition, negative version here. Dishonor your parents and you will die a lonely death.
Probably with vultures involved.
Yeah, so we looked at quite a few passages to drive that point home now. And then let's restate the 10 words takeaway positive version.
Honor your parents and you will enjoy a happy life.
Yeah, so it's kind of like one of those commandments that goes without saying, like honor your parents so that you live long in the land. Well, yeah. What's the old saying? Like, life's hard. It's harder when you're stupid, right? I mean, like you can make anything, speaking to Jordan Peterson, you can make any situation worse. Like he always says, that's the definition of hell, right?
Yeah, you think it can't get worse, but it always does.
Yeah, it always can, especially if you contribute to it and make it worse.
Yeah.
Like bad plan, right? So honoring your parents is one of those good things you can do to make life a heck of a lot better for everybody, for you, for your parents. Your parents poured their love and their lives into you. Mm-hmm. And so this is saying you should return it back to them by honoring them.
Yeah, I know a lot of people could hear that and think, well, my parents are the exception. They were not good. I mean, and I don't know, what people's situations are, but if you've never had like a baby of your own, if your parents even, if you're even alive, because babies can get real annoying, sometimes. As much as we love them, they're cute, but, crying and, just deciding, yeah, well, you're not going to sleep tonight. There are rough times ahead with a baby. So whether it's, a parent or like a foster care, like somebody at least had enough patience to keep you alive, and it's harder than it sounds. There are times where you just don't want to do it.
And it's hard to understand, just like we were talking about, it's hard to understand everything that goes into emperor's decisions.
Oh, yeah.
Or a jury's decisions. Yeah. Your parents' decisions and where you came from.
I mean, when you were sitting there in diapers, like you don't know what they were dealing with, what was going through their head.
Yeah.
I'm sure, any parent could have done something better, but even a, quote unquote bad parent, probably, they're probably dealing, we talked about this generational thing. There's always stuff that builds up on them as well. And they were doing their best to try to work through it in the way they see fit.
Yeah, because like this says honor your parents, not, mindlessly obey your parents.
Yeah,
like
not worship them.
If I'm like, hey, Caleb, here, have another cigarette and another beer, like, it's like, really, Dad, Like
I'll take the beer.
Oh, okay. Well, so the thing is, like, how do you honor your parents in a situation like that when your parents, are say offering you the wrong thing? And there are ways to honor them and say,
Yeah, I think about, I was listening to a Bible study. It's called The Word of the Lord Endures Forever. So if you're curious, I'll just give them a shout out. And they were going through Psalms, and there's a psalm, a lot of the Psalms give us the context in David's life, right? There's a psalm that he writes after Doeg, who's some foreigner, I can't remember from where.
Edomite.
Yeah, that sounds right. Turns him into Saul because he saw him taking, when Saul's looking for him, he saw him take refuge with the priests, and so he rats on him. And in the psalm, David calls him a liar, right? Like, I don't remember how he phrased it, lover of deceit or something like that. And in the study, they were saying, well, he told the truth. Like, everybody else was not telling Saul where David was, and he said where he was. Isn't that the truth? And their explanation of it in the study was, the problem is that Saul had already said, oh, my son Jonathan is plotting against me with David, who's plotting against me. And to keep silent, to not uphold that idea in Saul's head would be honest, because Saul is lying to himself. So Doeg is helping Saul, like he's supporting that idea that Saul has. So, you could honor your parents even when they're doing something dishonorable, right? In some cases, actually pushing back would be the honorable thing. Mm-hmm. Not when you're 5, you don't know what you're doing. But as you mature, you can start to realize, well, they may not see it this way. They might think it's dishonor, but sometimes it's, even protecting them from some of their own, bad ideas or something. Certainly this makes sense when you're the parent taking care of the kid, but the older you get, the more the role starts to reverse, like we talked about. And at some point you do have to start caring for the parents. So sometimes honoring involves, not following that person's will, but following God's will.
So consider all the things that Caleb's talking about. Consider this commandment as we've discussed it today. Consider our takeaways, that if you dishonor your parents, you die a lonely death. If you honor your parents, these are generalizations, right? Then you enjoy a happy life and make the world a happier place, right? I mean, if you look back at your life and ask yourself, have I honored my parents, with my life? And then think about what can I do to better honor my parents, assuming they're still living, or even if they're past, you can honor them to your children or to
there are certainly ways I think
siblings.
you could certainly dishonor somebody who's died, like speak ill of the dead. So at the very least, not doing that would be honoring them.
That would make the world a better place.
Yeah,
I think. Okay. Well, he's Caleb and I'm Timothy. Thank you for listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica Inc. Used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2025 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.